So the real question is this newest release from Green River a cocktail-only bourbon? We're gonna find out today on the My Bourbon Journey Whiskey Review channel. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Scott. We're gonna touch a little bit on the brand new or newest release as of July 30th, 2024 of Green River's 1885 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. They have turned this blended and proofed for the bar. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go beyond the cocktail part of it. I'm gonna sip on this thing and see whether or not it has the characteristics of what a nice little sipping bourbon would be, and would all of those characteristics transition into a really nice cocktail. So we're gonna dive into that a little bit and go through the same formalities as I would any type of sipping bourbon or anything that we may consider a sipping bourbon. So again, this is the newest release from Green River Distilling Company out of Owensboro, Kentucky. It's coming in at 85 proof or 42.5% ABV. MSRP on this is actually really friendly, and for a 1 liter bottle at $21.99. Mash bill on this is going to be 76% corn, 15% rye, 9% malted barley. Again, it's non-age stated, but one other thing that I like with this being a low proof is the fact that they are non-chill filtering this. So at a lower proof, they're allowing for more of those fatty acids to remain in the bourbon, allowing for this to have maybe a little bit more thickness, richness that will add to that extra layer of flavor and allow this to maybe be a sipping bourbon as well as a cocktail bourbon. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the review of, again, the newest from Green River Distilling Company, their 1885 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. All right, so color-wise, as you'd imagine, 85 proof, it's been watered down a little bit. Not a lot of color to this thing. Again, more of a kind of light honey type of color. But what I'll say is moving the whiskey around in the glass, there are more oils than you would expect. So I like to see that, as that will hopefully translate over to more flavor, not only sipping, but also when making cocktails with it as well. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive into the nose and see what kind of characteristics this one's gonna give us. Boy, so right away, I'm getting a nice little hint of that spice, more green apple, caramel, really nice kind of light honey notes. A little bit of that corn grain. Again, it's going to be a minimum of 4 years old, so I'm not going to call this necessarily a young whiskey because Bottle and Bond has its own category, again, of a minimum age statement of 4 years old. Yeah, like I mentioned before, really nice kind of caramel apple notes. Again, a little bit more of that kind of spice, a little bit of maybe even a kind of like a sweet tea kind of feel to this. Actually, a little bit more, as I kind of nose it more, a little more barrel influence. So there is that char level that's there. Again, not overpowering anything, but there is a nice layer of some actual barrel influence on it. Yeah, very approachable. I'm gonna say kind of more of that kind of tried and true type of bourbon profile so far on the nose. All right, more importantly, let's see how this one's gonna taste and find out whether or not this has some sippability characteristics, or if this is simply gonna be something you're gonna want to use in cocktails only. Cheers. Interesting, so like I got right away on the nose, this is very much caramel, green apple, a little bit of honey. Surprisingly, there's a nice spice factor, and I can see where even this 15% rye that it has in it is going to allow for this to shine in a cocktail. Now, just right away from a sipping standpoint, there are those bourbon characteristics that are there. Nothing overly complex. However, if you're in a pinch or just want something that's very light, this will give you that. So like I said before, early on, green apple, caramel, honey, nice spice, a little bit of that kind of barrel influence, all just kind of tamed down a little bit so far. A little bit of a corn presence. Again, as I had mentioned, just tamper your expectations. I think most people will be knowing that it's 85 proof and that it's not going to just drink like something that's 100 or even, 110 or above. This is going to have its place. But again, I don't think there's anything off-putting about it at all. It's just giving you those very light bourbon flavor kind of profile. And I think there is a place for a lot of people where they can appreciate this, where they may not want those big proofs, but to have something that's still going to have some nice flavor profiles. This is offering that so far. And what I'll say about Green River is they've quickly become a brand that is starting to kind of develop a particular kind of profile. Now, admittedly, I'm not getting as much of what I've gotten from their full proof or their regular wheated bourbon or standard bourbon, where there's more cherry notes, a little more tobacco, a little more richness. This again is just tampered down in terms of the overall profile that it has. But again, it's offering that standard bourbon type of profile so far. I still think the fact that they're non-chill filtering it is huge. At that lower proof, I think it's allowing for this to be more flavorful than had they chill filter this and eliminated some of those fatty acids that were in there that are holding a lot of those kind of, flavor molecules, let's call it. So again, that is a huge factor for me with this in not only making or allowing this to be a semi-sipping bourbon, but will hold up really well in cocktails. There is definitely enough spice. I think there's enough sweetness to balance out anything. So if you're going to make maybe a traditional whiskey old fashioned, this is going to work, I think, perfectly. Again, you're not going to have a huge amount of alcohol, so maybe you can have an extra one or two, but this will serve perfectly for both situations. And what I mean by that is, if you want to sip on something, again, that has that light bourbon profile, something, again, that's just going to allow you to kind of get into the evening, just enjoy something that's maybe either over a cube of ice or neat like I'm sipping on it, this will be perfectly fine for something like that. This I'll prefer over other brands that are offering those kind of products in this kind of price range. I think this has a slightly better profile than some of the other ones that I won't mention in this, but you can probably figure out what it is that I'm talking about. But so far, I think just from a easy sipping standpoint, I have no issues with this being a light sipping bourbon. So there you go. My final conclusion would be, what is it good for? Again, like I mentioned before, a easy, light sipping bourbon. Again, if you're somebody that's new to bourbon and you're looking for just that really nice kind of entry level type of bourbon profile, this will definitely give you that. You can't expect for this to have a bunch of big, bold, rich flavors. It's not going to at 85 proof. Now, shifting over to the cocktail section, this I think is going to work perfectly from the standpoint of, again, as I had mentioned before, non-chill filtered, 85 proof. There's enough sweetness, enough spice for sure. That's going to allow this to make a really nice cocktail. And I can see how and why they've kind of designed this bourbon to be one of those more shelf bourbons that bartenders are going to want to reach for to make a really nice cocktail. I think, again, this will do a fantastic job for that category specifically. So there you have it. Again, if you were someone who is just now seeing the 1885 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey from Green River, and you wanted to know, is it a sipper? Is it a cocktail whiskey? My answer to that is yes. Just temper your expectations on the overall complexity. Understand the fact that it's an 85 proof non-chill filtered bourbon. So you're going to get, again, a lot of those bourbon characteristics just on a lighter type of scale. Shifting over to the cocktail portion, again, I think it's perfectly fine for cocktails. We'll make a nice flavorful old-fashioned, maybe Manhattan if you choose to use bourbon, something along those lines. But again, I think it serves both of those purposes perfectly. So there you go. From Green River Distilling Company, this is their 1885 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. bottled at 85 proof, non-chill filtered, and in a 1 liter bottle. So thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Now the question is for you, have you had this? Have you had other whiskeys from Green River? Let me know your thoughts below, specifically on this one and or your overall thoughts on Green River as a whole. So if you'd like to follow me, you can on Facebook and Instagram, those places at My Bourbon Journey. If you'd like to help support the channel and become part of the Mash and Journey Whiskey Club, make sure you check out the Patreon link in the description below. That down there with a lot of other great things for you as well. So there you have it from Green River Distilling Company, their newest release, their 1885 Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. And remember, it's about the journey and not the destination. Cheers.